So this is the video for section R2. That's the second section in the review chapter. We're dealing with real numbers and their properties. The Venn diagram shows here sort of all of our different types of real numbers. So real numbers, which are basically most of the numbers you've dealt with. If you've been exposed to any kind of imaginary or complex numbers, that's sort of something different. We'll deal with that later on this year. But for now, think about almost basically every number you've ever dealt with is a real number. And then we can subdivide those into two different subgroups. One is irrational numbers, like the square root of 2, pi, those are irrational numbers. And then rational numbers, which are numbers that could be written as a ratio. So fractions or repeating decimals would be considered rational numbers. The subset, you can see like this white region here that we've labeled integers is a subset of the rational numbers. So for example, negative 11 could be written as negative 11 over 1, right? So that could be written as a fraction. We wouldn't. We would just write it as negative 11. But those integers, positive and negative integers, are all in this set. And then the next one would be whole numbers. So everything in this region is all whole numbers. And then a subset of the whole numbers would be the natural numbers. So you should just be comfortable with that and that setup. Some ideas that we're going to deal with is sort of reviewing a little bit of the exponents. We'll deal with more complex review of exponents in later sections. But a raised to the n just means that a is multiplied by itself, and there's n of them. So like n times, so you have n a's multiplied together. Make sure that you're comfortable with your order of operations and properties of all real numbers. Now you should be reviewing these and know these. These are on page 14 of our textbook. So either on your electronic version, your PDF of your textbook, or a textbook itself if you signed one out. You don't have to memorize what they are, but you should be able to use them and be comfortable with them, but you don't have to sort of memorize all the titles, all the names for those. Properties of absolute values is what we're getting to next. Absolute value of some number is always going to be greater than or equal to 0. A could take on a value of 0, so that's why the equal sign is there. Basically, absolute value of any number is going to be a positive, right? Or possibly 0, not negative. The absolute value of negative A will be equal to the absolute value of A. Absolute value of A times the absolute value of B is going to be equal to the absolute value of the product of A and B. So A by itself could be a negative value. B could be a negative value. The product of their absolutes is always going to be positive because this is going to be positive, that's going to be positive. Positive times a positive is going to be a positive. So the absolute value is also going to be a positive. Sort of likewise, if we take the quotient or a fraction of absolute values, it's going to be equal to the absolute value of the fraction or of the quotient or the division. All right, so given of course that b, the denominator, cannot be 0, right? Because then we would be dividing by 0. So often when we have fractions or division, we're going to indicate that the bottom or the denominator cannot be equal to 0. If we take a plus b and we do the absolute value of a plus b, that should be less than the absolute value of a plus the absolute value of b, which if you think about it makes sense. This can only be a positive. This can only be a positive. You're adding them up, you have even more of a positive value. If A and B, if one of those is negative, then what we actually do is subtract the magnitudes, and so the absolute value of that will be less than. If they're both positive, then it will be equal, but if the value of A or B is either one is negative, then it will be less. Try it out. I mean, try some values. Try value A of 4 and B of negative 5, and you'll see that that's true. And so we kind of use this idea of absolute values to look at the distance on a number line. So if we have like a distance on a number line and we have two locations, A and B, and we want to know what is that distance between those 2 points on the number line, then we can either take A minus B and then take the absolute value, or we could take B minus A and take the absolute value. So let's just say this is -6 and this was 5. Of course, we'd have like a 0 in here, right? So the difference between those, we know it's 11, but the absolute value, so we have absolute value of -6 minus B, or we would say the absolute value of B, which is 5, minus a -6, and you can see this would be the absolute value of -11, which is 11, or the absolute value of 11, which is 11. So that, works for taking the difference, the absolute value of the difference of the two coordinates on a number line will give us the distance. All right, so that's really it for section R2. There is a whole page of homework for this as well.